Lived out here in the Appalachian Mountains for most of my life, and I always thought I knew what to expect once the sun went down. Coyotes howling in the distance, maybe a bear rustling around. Nothing much shakes me. But on this night, everything changed. My day had been uneventful, just chores and dinner before midnight rolled around. Bucks, my husky, was curled up by the fireplace like he always is. He's the happiest dog on the planet, only barks unless the mailman shows up. That's why I nearly dropped my tea when I heard this growl coming from him. Deep and fierce, unlike anything I'd heard before. I glanced at him and saw he was standing rigid, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the window. I couldn't see anything but my reflection in the glass. And I tried to shrug it off, mumbling something like, "Easy, bud." But inside, I was rattled. I've never seen Max look that tense, tail stiff, nose practically glued to the window. It was enough to get my heart racing. Soon I realized I still had to lock up my garage down the slope near the house. Normally, this isn't a big deal. Just a quick trip in the dark with a flashlight. But the way Max was behaving, let's just say I was on edge. Still, I convinced myself it was no big deal. I grabbed my jacket, clicked my flashlight, and headed out. Max insisted on coming, practically pressing against my leg with every step forward. Outside, the air felt different. I couldn't place why. Maybe it was too still. No crickets, no wind through the branches, just a heavy quiet. Halfway to the garage, Max let out another warning growl that made my stomach tighten. Before I could turn, I noticed the garage door was slightly open, even though I was sure I'd closed it earlier. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to keep going. I tugged the door shut and locked it. That's when this insane commotion erupted in the woods behind me. I can't fully do the sound justice, but it was like a sudden surge of noise tearing through the undergrowth. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, almost like a crowd sprinting among the trees. I froze, and Max just pressed against me, teeth bared. Whatever caused that ruckus had to be larger than a fox or deer. It sounded massive. My body was shaking so badly that I stumbled with the flashlight, nearly dropping it. I backed up toward the house, trying not to break into a sprint, though my legs were begging me to run. The closer we got to the porch, the more frantic everything felt. I got inside, practically shoved the door shut, and slid the deadbolt into place. My brain was racing, trying to explain what I had just heard. A bunch of deer? A bear with cubs? But it was so loud, so widespread, like multiple animals. I stood in the hallway, breathing heavily, Max at my feet, staring at the door. I realized I had a new axe in the upstairs closet. Adrenaline was making my hands tremble. My pulse hammered as I rushed upstairs and grabbed the axe. Just as I debated whether to investigate or hide, Max let out a bark. That bark. He only does that when something's seriously wrong. So, against every instinct, I headed back out onto the porch with my flashlight and axe. My chest was tight, my breathing uneven, but I needed to know if an intruder or some animal was messing around. I scanned the tree line with the beam. Nothing moved. Silence reigned, almost unnaturally, as though nature itself took a step back, waiting to see what I'd do next. Then, just as I was about to turn and go inside, I heard this low murmur, more like a swarm of hushed voices than a single sound. It came from the very edge of my property. Out near where the trees thickened, my stomach dropped. It didn't sound like English, but it was disturbingly close to speech. Max suddenly whimpered, tail tucked, as if he wanted to drag me inside. I couldn't see anything, but it felt like eyes were on me, a presence both everywhere and nowhere. The murmurs seemed to shift direction, echoing out from multiple spots at once. My light swept across the yard, revealing not one silhouette, not one flicker of movement. Yet the voices, if that's what they were, didn't stop. A wave of nausea hit me so hard that I thought I might collapse right there on the porch. I forced myself to breathe through it, whispering Max's name for a shred of comfort. After what felt like ages, I managed to pull myself back inside. That door had never felt so flimsy. I latched it and checked the windows, too spooked to turn on any indoor lights, hoping that darkness would hide me. The night wasn't over, though. had a terrible feeling this was only the beginning. Like whatever was out there wasn't done with us. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with some random animal. This felt orchestrated and purposeful, and it was tightening around me step by step. I didn't have a clue what was causing it, but I knew one thing for sure. My home, my safe space, was no longer secure. Max's instincts had been right from the start, and I dreaded what might be next. I had barely closed my eyes for a second, and I couldn't rest, even if I tried. We were on high alert. Max was tense, pacing the living room and refusing to leave the front door. I kept the lights off, thinking somehow it would make me less of a target. My phone sat on the table, but out here in the middle of nowhere, good luck trying to call for help. Even if I did get a signal, what could I possibly say to emergency services? Hello? Yes, there are voices surrounding my house, and I don't see anyone, but my dog is freaking out. That weird muttering from outside seemed to vibrate through the walls like a low chorus of whispers just behind the wooden panels. It was maddening, because I couldn't single out a phrase or identify if it was even human speech. It rose and fell in waves, and every so often it almost sounded like chanting. I guess I was too rattled to be sure. All I knew was that my gut told me there were multiple presences out there. More than one set of footsteps had circled the house after I first came inside. Sometime around 4:35 or maybe closer to 5 a.m., the tone of the murmuring changed. Hard to explain, but the pitch went lower, almost guttural. Then, slowly the sound started drifting away, deeper into the woods. I caught faint rustling through the thick brush. Then, a final few snaps of branches. In their wake, frogs croaked, and a couple of birds called. It was as if the natural world had been stifled all night and finally breathed again. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't that comforting. Still felt like I might vomit from all the stress. I checked each window for any sign of movement. Nothing. The driveway looked untouched, aside from my footprints. Max gradually relaxed, though he wouldn't lie down until the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. Once I was fairly certain the immediate threat had disappeared, I stepped outside onto the porch for a breath of air, axe clutched tight in my hand. The yard was a mess of broken branches, and the lingering smell of disturbed soil clung to the morning breeze. Yet bizarrely, there were no footprints, no trace of a crowd or horde of animals. The only proof was in my shaking limbs and Max's wretched stare. For now, daylight was my only shield, and I was not about to let my guard down after what had happened that night.